Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the minor characters of Adventure Time, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical, seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. Tonight, we're going to wander into the lives of characters who at first glance might seem small, silly, or even unimportant. But if Adventure Time has taught us anything, it's that every little detail, every hidden corner of ooh, holds stories worth telling. Even the tiniest voices carry wisdom if we're quiet enough to listen. And so we begin with someone very small indeed, Shelby the Worm. Shelby isn't a character who takes up a lot of screen time. He isn't a warrior, or a great king, or a cosmic being. He doesn't wield an elemental power or a crown that can shape the fate of the world. He lives in Finn and Jake's treehouse, tucked away inside the trunk, appearing now and then with his squeaky little voice and wiggly body. But there's something about Shelby that makes him more than just a background gag. He represents the overlooked wisdom of ooh, the kind of gentle guidance that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. Think about the first impression Shelby gives. He seems like nothing more than a worm who happens to be around. But the treehouse is not just a home, it's a place where lives intersect. Every creature living inside it has a reason, even if it's just to be a small thread in the larger tapestry. Shelby is part of that thread, a tiny neighbor to two of the most important heroes of the land of Ooh. And what's fascinating is that Shelby never acts like he's less important because of his size. In fact, his confidence is part of his charm. One of Shelby's most memorable moments is when he picks up Finn's sword. Now, for a worm with no arms, this seems almost laughable. And yet the way the story unfolds turns into something surprisingly heartfelt. Shelby takes on the role of a sword not because he wants glory or recognition, but because he feels a sense of responsibility. When the sword breaks, he doesn't just retreat into his hole. He becomes a new blade, Shelby's sword. In this transformation, the writers of Adventure Time give us a playful but thoughtful reminder. Even the smallest creature can step up and become something greater when the moment calls for it. This moment is especially striking because it flips our expectations. Adventure Time often loves to twist what we think we know. A worm shouldn't be a sword, right? A worm shouldn't be brave or strong or wise. But Shelby is all of those things in his own way, and perhaps that's the magic of his character. He shows us that bravery isn't about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about being willing to take a role, no matter how strange or unlikely, when the world asks it of you. Another small but telling aspect of Shelby's character is his personality. He has this quirky mix of sarcasm and wisdom. He's not afraid to tease Finn or Jake, poking fun at them when they deserve it. But he also slips in advice that resonates. He's like that friend you don't always notice in the group, the quiet one in the corner, until they suddenly say something that makes everyone stop and think. The fact that he lives literally inside Finn and Jake's home makes his role even more symbolic. Wisdom often comes from the heart of where we live, from voices close to us, not from distant heroes on lofty thrones. The beauty of Shelby is that he doesn't need to be grand to matter. He doesn't command armies, yet his presence still shapes the flow of certain episodes. He doesn't stand in the spotlight, but his words echo when you think back on them. And when he takes on the identity of Shelby Sword, it becomes even clearer that his arc is about potential hidden beneath the surface, waiting to reveal itself in the unlikeliest ways. Adventure Time, at its core, often blurs the line between silliness and seriousness. Shelby embodies this balance perfectly. He makes you smile with his tiny voice and wiggly body, but then he does something or says something that hits you in a quiet, thoughtful way. For a show that thrives on absurdity, that's one of its greatest strengths, using even the smallest characters to explore big truths. When you think about it, Shelby is also a mirror of Finn and Jake. They live adventurous, wild lives full of quests and battles. Shelby, on the other hand, lives right inside their tree, but he still finds a way to contribute to their journey. It's as if the writers are saying that you don't have to be a grand adventurer to play a role in the story. Sometimes just being present, ready to help in your own way, is enough. This makes Shelby's character surprisingly relatable. How many of us feel small sometimes, as though we're just a background character in the bigger world around us? And yet, like Shelby, we all carry moments where we can step forward, where we can be the sword in someone's life, or the voice that says exactly what's needed at the right time. Shelby reminds us that importance isn't measured by size or power, but by willingness and heart. Now, if we slow down and look even closer, there's another layer here. Shelby's decision to become a sword connects to one of Adventure Time's deeper themes, transformation. Across the series, we see characters change forms, identities, even destinies. Simon becomes the Ice King. Princess Bubblegum shifts from a ruler to a scientist to a warrior. Finn himself grows from a boy into a young man carrying the weight of Oo's future. Shelby, in his small way, is part of that theme. He literally transforms into something new, showing that change is not reserved for the powerful, but for anyone willing to embrace it. And what's especially soothing to notice is how natural that change feels. Shelby doesn't fight it, doesn't overthink it. He just becomes what he needs to be. There's something calming about that idea. The universe asks, and he answers without fuss. Maybe that's part of the wisdom Shelby carries. Sometimes the best path forward is simply to say yes when life invites you to take on a new shape. There's also something wonderful about the way Shelby exists in the treehouse, surrounded by so much life and activity. Finn and Jake's home isn't just a backdrop for their adventures. It's a living space with its own character, full of nooks and crannies, little details and inhabitants. And right there, at the center of it all, is Shelby, often overlooked but always present. It's almost symbolic, as though the heart of the tree itself has a small guardian living inside it. When we see Shelby interact with Finn and Jake, what's striking is the balance of humor and honesty. He isn't afraid to complain or roll his eyes at their antics, but underneath the jokes, there's a sense of grounding. He pulls their attention back to small truths, the kind you can miss when you're chasing after dragons or saving kingdoms. It's this grounding energy that makes Shelby so fascinating. He's the reminder that life is not just about the epic moments, but also the tiny ones happening right under our noses. And let's not forget, Shelby has his own little storylines. At one point, we even meet his sister, a worm named Snorlock, which gives a glimpse into the idea that Shelby has a whole family and personal history outside of what we usually see. These tiny moments open up a door to something bigger. It makes you wonder, how many hidden lives exist within Ooh that we never get to fully explore? Shelby's appearances give us the sense that every creature has its own path, no matter how small. There's also something to be said about his personality being a little bit of a foil to Finn and Jake. Where Finn charges headfirst into danger, and Jake takes a laid-back approach, Shelby seems to occupy a middle ground. He can be lazy, sure, but he also has a sharpness to his words, a kind of dry wit that cuts through the noise. That balance of humor and insight makes him feel oddly mature, like the grown-up voice living secretly in their walls. One of the most beautiful things about Shelby's role as Shelby Sword is how it blurs the line between tool and person. When Finn wields him, Shelby isn't just an object he talks, he reacts. He has feelings about what's happening. In a way, it's an exploration of identity. What does it mean to become something new, to serve a purpose while still keeping your individuality? Adventure Time doesn't hit us over the head with these questions, but they're there, tucked inside the silliness, waiting for us to notice. If we zoom out for a moment, Shelby's journey also touches on a bigger theme: the value of overlooked voices. In Ooh, the loudest characters often take up the most space: Ice King with his wild schemes, Marceline with her music, Princess Bubblegum with her endless inventions. Shelby doesn't have a kingdom or a crown. He doesn't even have arms, and yet he still matters. His transformation into a sword makes him part of the story's fabric, and that's powerful. It suggests that no matter how small or quiet someone is, their role has weight. It also makes you think about the symbolism of living underground. Worms, after all, are creatures of the earth. They tunnel beneath the surface, working unseen, keeping the soil alive. In a way, Shelby embodies this same quiet contribution. He might not be seen often, but his presence enriches the story just as worms enrich the ground. It's a natural metaphor. The hidden things beneath us are often the most essential. And there's something soothing about imagining his underground life. Tunnels winding beneath the roots of the treehouse. Little passageways where Shelby can retreat when the world feels too big. Maybe he spends hours wandering those dark, cool spaces, humming to himself, reflecting on everything happening above. In a world as chaotic as Ooh, where magic and monsters constantly collide, the idea of a quiet underground world feels comforting. Shelby doesn't need battles or glory. He has his own space and his own way of living. It's also worth noticing how Shelby's role evolves across the series. At first, he really is just a background character, a funny worm in the walls. But as time goes on, he gets more agency, more moments where his presence changes the direction of things. This slow unfolding mirrors the way minor details in our own lives can suddenly become important, something that someone we overlook can later turn out to be the key we didn't know we needed. That's what makes revisiting Shelby's moments so satisfying. There's a certain gentleness in the way he handles situations, too. Even when he's frustrated, even when he's playing the role of a sword, he never loses his humor. He never lets the weight of the world crush him. That lightness is part of his wisdom. Sometimes the best way to face chaos isn't with anger or fear, but with a small laugh, a shrug, and the willingness to keep going. Shelby doesn't dramatize things, and maybe that's exactly why his presence feels comforting. And here's another layer. When Shelby becomes a sword, he's literally taking on a role of protection. He becomes a tool for defense, for fighting, for saving others. For a tiny worm, that's an enormous responsibility. Yet he doesn't collapse under the pressure. He adapts. He wiggles into the shape that's needed. It's such a simple, funny idea on the surface, but the more you think about it, the deeper it becomes. He shows that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it wiggles, sometimes it squeaks, and sometimes it simply says yes to being what someone else needs. Another fascinating thing about Shelby is how often he acts like the voice of reason in situations where no one expects it. Think of all the times Finn and Jake rush headfirst into something without thinking. They are full of energy, adventure, and impulse, which is part of what makes them lovable. But it also means they sometimes need someone to pull them back, someone to remind them of reality. And there, from inside their own home, Shelby's tiny voice can be heard, grounding them with a remark that often sounds like common sense dressed in humor. It almost feels as if Shelby is Oo's way of reminding the heroes that wisdom doesn't always come from sages or mystical beings. Sometimes it comes from the smallest voice you could easily ignore. He's a contrast to characters like Prismo or Peppermint Butler, who are tied to deep cosmic or magical forces. Shelby doesn't need grand powers to have an impact. His gift is observation, timing, and a kind of playful honesty that slips past defenses. One of the most endearing aspects of Shelby is his independence. Despite living inside Finn and Jake's treehouse, he isn't just a sidekick who revolves around them. He has his own life, his own thoughts, even his own little arcs. The fact that he can exist in the same space as two of Oo's most important heroes without being overshadowed says something. It's as if the show itself respects him enough to let him be his own character, not just a tag-along. And when you think about it, that independence makes his eventual transformation into Shelby Sword even more powerful. It shows that even someone living quietly on the sidelines can step into the spotlight when destiny calls. If you pause to reflect on that transformation again, it holds a lot of metaphorical weight. Shelby becoming a sword is a literal fusion of vulnerability and strength. Worms are delicate creatures, soft and small. Swords are sharp, strong, and symbols of power. By bridging those opposites, Adventure Time makes a statement. Strength can come from softness, and vulnerability can transform into protection. It's a comforting thought, especially for anyone who has ever felt too small or too weak to make a difference. It's also worth remembering that in Adventure Time, objects often carry souls, personalities, or stories of their own. From the grass sword to the Enchiridion, from magical crowns to enchanted items, every tool feels alive in some way. Shelby Sword takes this idea and pushes it further by making the weapon not just enchanted, but literally a living being with feelings and opinions. That idea is both hilarious and strangely moving. It makes us rethink what tools really are and what it means to rely on them. Are they just objects, or are they extensions of those who wield them? With Shelby's sword, the line is beautifully blurred. There's also a gentleness to Shelby's humor that makes him stand out. He doesn't lash out or try to dominate others. Instead, he uses wit to make his point. The subtle humor is part of why his wisdom doesn't come across as heavy or overbearing. He teaches without lecturing, guides without controlling. That balance makes him feel safe, almost like a soft pillow of wisdom hidden inside the treehouse walls. In the middle of Oo's chaos, Shelby is a reminder that not everything has to be loud to be important. Now let's imagine what Shelby's life might look like when Finn and Jake are out adventuring. The house is quiet, the tree's wood creaks gently, and Shelby slips through little cracks in the bark to explore the tunnels beneath. Maybe he visits his worm family. Maybe he hums to himself. Maybe he daydreams about what's happening far above. There's a cozy solitude in that image. While the world above bursts with magic, danger, and endless quests, Shelby creates his own world of calm beneath the roots. That duality, the chaos above, the stillness below, is what makes his character so soothing to think about before bed. And when we do see Shelby interact with others, he isn't intimidated by size or power. He never acts like he's beneath anyone, even though physically he's one of the tiniest beings in Ooh. That confidence is quietly inspiring. It suggests that worth is not tied to stature. In a show where giants, demons, and cosmic entities roam freely, Shelby shows that a worm can carry himself with the same dignity as anyone else. This idea is echoed in the way he sometimes critiques Finn and Jake. He's not afraid to call them out when they're being reckless or silly. Think about how bold that really is. The great heroes of Ooo, constantly celebrated for their bravery, being reminded of their flaws by a worm. Yet Shelby does it in such a casual way that it never feels confrontational. It feels like a friend giving you a nudge, or like the universe whispering a small truth in your ear. That's the essence of his wisdom, gentle correction, that doesn't need to be harsh. In many ways, Shelby can be seen as a reflection of the treehouse itself. The tree is big, towering, and central to so many stories. But inside, it's full of small hidden spaces, little worlds tucked away where you wouldn't think to look. Shelby is one of those hidden spaces given a voice. He embodies the idea that within every great structure, every great adventure, there are tiny lives unfolding quietly. And those lives, though small, are no less real. Even the choice to make him a worm feels deliberate. Worms are often overlooked, sometimes even dismissed as gross or insignificant. Yet ecologically, they are vital. They keep the soil alive, turning decay into nourishment. Without worms, the world above would wither, and in that way, Shelby mirrors his species. He isn't flashy, but he's essential. His presence enriches the story of Ooo in the same way real worms enrich the earth. When you begin to think about Shelby like this, he becomes more than just comic relief. He becomes a symbol of how life works in layers. On the surface, we see heroes and battles, but beneath it all are the quiet workers, the small guardians, the hidden voices. Adventure Time doesn't forget about these voices. It gives them characters like Shelby who wiggle into the story just long enough to remind us of their place. And maybe that's why Shelby feels so surprisingly deep for such a small character. He embodies the theme that even the tiniest beings hold value. He whispers the truth that sometimes the smallest role can carry the biggest meaning. And when he becomes a sword, that truth shines brighter than ever. Because in that moment, Shelby isn't just helping Finn. He's teaching us that no matter who we are, we all have the potential to transform into something brave, something necessary, something unforgettable. Another layer that makes Shelby special is his relationship with fear. Think about how worms are naturally fragile, small, and vulnerable. The world above is filled with things that could crush or ignore him without a thought. And yet Shelby doesn't act consumed by fear. He's cautious at times, yes, but never paralyzed. Instead, he adapts. He teases. He comments. He even takes on the role of a sword. In his own way, he redefines what courage looks like. Courage isn't always charging into battle with no hesitation. Sometimes courage is being willing to show up at all, even when you're tiny in a big, unpredictable world. This is one of those quiet truths Adventure Time often slips into its storytelling. We might expect bravery to come in grand gestures, but Shelby shows us that bravery can also look like speaking up when no one expects it, or wiggling into a new role because the situation demands it. He never loses his sense of humor in the process, and that's a lesson too. Bravery doesn't have to be grim or heavy. It can be lighthearted, funny, even playful. Now let's think about the idea of Shelby living inside Finn and Jake's treehouse a little more deeply. The treehouse is not just a base of operations. It's the heart of their story, a place where they grow, rest, and dream between adventures. Shelby being part of that home means he isn't just a background character. He's woven into the fabric of their lives. He's literally part of their safe space, and that detail adds another layer of meaning. Sometimes the wisest voices in our own lives are the ones closest to us, the ones we might overlook because they're simply always there. Shelby is that voice for Finn and Jake, tucked away in the walls, ready to remind them of truths they might forget. And while Shelby is mostly a light-hearted presence, his existence hints at bigger ideas about scale in the land of Ooh. If a worm can have a personality, a family, and a role in the story, then what does that say about the countless unseen creatures living in hidden spaces? Adventure Time constantly reminds us that the world is layered. There's always another story happening just below the surface. Shelby is a small glimpse into that underground web of life, a quiet nudge that for every grand battle we see, there are smaller lives being lived out of sight. This sense of scale is part of what makes Adventure Time so comforting as a bedtime story. It reassures us that even if we feel small, we're still part of something bigger. Just as Shelby is part of Finn and Jake's home, each of us has a place in the wider story around us. We may not always see the whole picture, but that doesn't make our presence any less important. Another fun aspect of Shelby is the way he delivers his lines. His voice is squeaky, almost comedic, and yet it carries a sharpness that makes you listen. That combination humor wrapped around truth is one of the oldest storytelling techniques. It's the fool archetype, the trickster, the jester who entertains while slipping in wisdom. Shelby fits this mold perfectly, proving that even a worm can play the part of a timeless archetype. His humor lowers defenses, and once we're smiling, the wisdom sneaks in. It's also touching to notice how Shelby doesn't strive to be something more than what he is. Yes, he becomes a sword, but he doesn't chase after that role. It comes to him naturally, through circumstance, and he accepts it without hesitation. There's no yearning, no endless ambition, no bitterness about being small. He's comfortable in his wormness. That kind of quiet acceptance is rare even among Ooh's biggest characters. Princess Bubblegum is restless with invention, Ice King longs for lost love, Finn wrestles with growing up, and Jake floats through life with questions he doesn't always answer. Shelby, by contrast, is at peace. He doesn't chase, he just is. And maybe that's why his character feels so grounding. He embodies the calm that comes from being content with your place in the world. Still, that contentment doesn't stop him from adapting when needed. That balance, being content, yet flexible, is one of the deepest lessons Shelby gives us. Life asks us to change sometimes. It asks us to take on roles we never imagined, to stretch and grow in uncomfortable ways. Shelby shows us how to do that with grace. He doesn't fight the change. He doesn't complain endlessly about it. He simply embraces it, and in doing so, becomes something both funny and profound. It's also meaningful to think about Shelby as part of the broader theme of transformation that runs through Adventure Time. So many characters are constantly changing. Marceline balancing her vampire and demon sides, Simon caught between humanity and madness, Finn growing from boy to man, even BMO shifting between machine and personhood. Shelby's transformation into a sword may seem small compared to those arcs, but it belongs to the same pattern. It's a reminder that change is universal. Whether you're a cosmic entity or a little worm, life will ask you to transform, and your willingness to embrace that change is what defines you. Now picture Shelby as Shelby Sword again. Finn is holding him, swinging him in battle, and there's Shelby squeaking out comments, reacting to every strike. It's absurd and funny, but it's also strangely moving. Here is a worm, once just a background character in a treehouse, now directly shaping the outcome of an adventure. He's no longer on the sidelines. He's in the middle of the story, influencing it with every move. That image alone carries a powerful message. No matter how small you think your role is, there may come a time when you are at the very center of the story, making a difference in ways you never imagined. And after all of this, Shelby still returns to his life, his tunnels, his treehouse walls. He doesn't demand to stay in the spotlight. He doesn't try to cling to being a sword forever. He goes back to being himself. And that, too, is wise. Not every transformation is permanent. Some are just for a season, a moment when life needs you to take on a role. Afterwards, you return to your own rhythm, changed by the experience, but still yourself. Shelby models this beautifully. He shows us that it's okay to step up when needed, and it's also okay to step back when the moment has passed. In the end, Shelby may never be remembered as one of Ooh's great champions, but in his small, wiggly way, he reflects some of the deepest truths the show has to offer. He is a worm, yes, but also a sword, a guide, a friend, and a mirror of transformation. He proves that wisdom doesn't need to shout, and that even the smallest voices can shape the largest stories. And maybe as we drift off to sleep tonight, there's comfort in knowing that our own small voices matter too. Like Shelby, we might not always be in the spotlight, but when the time comes, we can transform into exactly what the world needs us to be. Now that we've spent some time with Shelby, the wise little worm who always seems to have more layers than his tiny size would suggest, let's follow him into the world he belongs to. Because if Shelby can offer us so much thoughtfulness and perspective, it begs the question, what is life like for the rest of his kind? Adventure Time often zooms in on grand castles, endless fields, and skies full of cosmic beings, but hidden under all of that are the tiniest of societies. The underground world of worms, critters, and mini-communities is one of those quiet pieces of lore that most viewers don't think much about. But when you stop and pay attention, it becomes a fascinating reminder that even in Ooh, where titans and deities walk, there's still a whole society existing quietly below the surface. Think about how worms are shown. Shelby, of course, is the most well-known, but in several episodes we get little hints that there are others like him, living beneath the floorboards, in the roots of trees, and in tunnels stretching deep under the land. They're never portrayed as weak or insignificant. In fact, their world feels just as organized and thoughtful as the larger kingdoms above. And when we look at this carefully, it tells us something important. Adventure Time has a way of reminding us that no one is too small to matter. Picture for a moment the tiny tunnels. They would be winding and dark to us, but to a worm, they are wide avenues, carefully carved paths connecting homes, meeting spots, and hidden corners where families gather. What might look like a crumb to Finn and Jake could be a feast underground. A single droplet of water might serve as a well. These little details open the imagination to an entire culture that isn't shown directly on screen, but is implied by Shelby's presence. And then there's the symbolism. Worms throughout stories and myths are tied to cycles of the earth, renewal, and even wisdom. They break down old things to make way for the new. If Shelby represents the thoughtful voice of this underground world, then perhaps the worm community is meant to reflect something profound. The idea that renewal and perspective often come from places we overlook. In a way, the underground world could be thought of as a mirror to the grander kingdoms. Just as the Candy Kingdom has its citizens and leaders, so too might the worms have a structure, a way of working together, and even their own heroes. Shelby stepping into Finn and Jake's story could be seen as him acting like an ambassador of sorts, carrying the quiet strength of his people into the bigger world above. There's even a comforting bedtime-like rhythm to imagining this. While the surface of Ooh is filled with chaos, monsters, and adventures, the world beneath is steady, hidden, soft. The worms go about their business, creating little networks and keeping balance in the soil. They are overlooked, but never unimportant, and if you think about it, this layered storytelling reflects real life too. Every towering tree you see in the forest, every blooming flower only stands tall because of the hidden world beneath the roots, the soil, and yes, the worms. So when Shelby pops up to give advice or sing a song, it isn't just him being quirky. It's as if the underground world itself is speaking, reminding us that smallness does not mean insignificance, and that even unseen places have stories to tell. Now let's wander deeper into that imagined world. What else might be waiting in those tunnels? Could there be worm elders who pass down knowledge, or perhaps tiny adventurers of their own, braving dangers we'd never noticed from above? Adventure Time never fully shows us, but that mystery is part of the magic. It leaves space for us to dream. If we think about it, the underground world beneath Ooh is almost like a parallel dimension. On the surface, Finn and Jake face grand quests, legendary battles, and cosmic mysteries. But below all that lies a realm of tiny lives quietly unfolding. The worms, bugs, and hidden critters have their own dramas, their own legends, and their own conflicts. What's so enchanting about Adventure Time is how it suggests that no matter how small, every creature has its own perspective and story that matters. It almost nudges us to reflect on the idea that while we're caught up in our own big adventures, there are countless other lives happening just outside of our view. Shelby is often our guide into this smaller scale. Remember how casually he mentioned once that he has an entire family living inside of him? It's played off as a funny, surreal throwaway, but if we pause for a moment, it opens up entire layers of possibility. Does that mean Shelby himself is like a microcosm, a host to another society? And if that's true, how many more of these tiny hidden worlds exist inside the bodies of other creatures in Ooh? Suddenly, we start to realize the underground isn't just physical. It could be metaphorical, too. Tiny realms within tiny realms, each one with its own culture. The show gives us glimpses of these smaller societies. We see Shelby's sister, who instantly feels like a character with her own independent story, her own sense of self and direction. She's not just Shelby's sibling, she's someone with her own destiny, her own choices. That detail alone shows how carefully the writers thought about even the smallest corners of the world. And that's where the underground world becomes fascinating. It's not only a literal space beneath our feet, it's also a storytelling device reminding us that unseen lives carry equal weight. Imagine for a moment what a day in the underground might feel like. Instead of great castles and vast open plains, there are intricate tunnel systems, carved carefully through the dirt like veins running beneath Ooh. The walls glow faintly with moss or fungus, lighting up homes no bigger than a walnut. Tiny marketplaces may exist where worms and beetles trade for things that make sense in their scale shards of glass, for mirrors, crumbs of bread for feasts, discarded buttons for shields. To them, the world above is so massive and unreachable, it might as well be a myth, while their underground lives feel just as significant as Finn's adventures to them. It's almost whimsical to think of how close these two scales of life really are. Finn could be stomping through the woods, chasing down a monster, completely unaware that right beneath him an entire worm council is meeting, debating on whether to expand their tunnels further into the east or to stay hidden from the dangers of predators above. We as viewers get little teases of this idea through Shelby and his world, but the show leaves most of it up to our imagination, which makes it all the more magical. There's also a sense of timelessness to the underground. The surface of Oo is chaotic empires rise and fall, magical catastrophes reshape landscapes, and great battles are fought almost daily. But underground, things move at their own pace. Worms build slowly, bugs migrate gently, and tiny dramas unfold quietly, away from the noise. In a way, the underground is immune to the chaos above. It endures. It thrives in simplicity. And that makes it one of the most stable ecosystems in all of Oo. What's even more intriguing is how this underground system could stretch farther than we imagine. We're shown little hints that it's not just beneath the treehouse or a small patch of forest. Shelby himself has mentioned traveling tunnels that seem endless. Could it be that the underground world forms a network spanning across Oo, connecting the Candy Kingdom, the Fire Kingdom, and beyond? If so, that means beneath all the kingdoms we know, there's a hidden web of life that not even the rulers above fully understand. And here's where the lore deepens. If these networks are that vast, then they might have their own legends about Finn and Jake. Imagine tiny songs or myths told about the giants who live above them, the ones who shake the ground with their footsteps or cause quakes when they battle. To Shelby and his people, Finn could very well be a figure of legend, not just a neighbor. That perspective reshapes how we view the story. The grand hero we know might only be a shadow or distant tale to someone smaller and yet still meaningful. If you think about it, the underground world isn't really separate from Oo at all. It's woven into it, like the roots of a tree that spread and twists beneath the soil, unseen but essential. For the people who live up above, life carries on in the open air under the sun and stars. But beneath there is a society where those same stars are only stories whispered in the dark, and where sunlight is as rare and valuable as treasure. To imagine what it must be like for these creatures, some as tiny as insects, others perhaps bigger but still hidden, you have to picture an entire world that operates on different rules. In one episode, we catch a glimpse of this underground when Shelby's brother, Kent, decides to leave the safety of the nest and go on an adventure. Kent's journey may seem small to Finn and Jake, but within the underground society it is enormous, the equivalent of someone from Oo traveling across kingdoms. Every step through the winding tunnels is filled with risk, not just from predators, but from the collapse of soil, from floods, or even from the casual movements of the giants above. Imagine a worm making its way forward only to feel the earth quake as Finn stomps past in the grass, completely unaware of the lives shaking beneath his feet. To the underground folk, the surface world must feel like a place of gods, powerful beings who can shape the fate of entire colonies without ever noticing them. And yet, the underground is not simply a place of fear. There is resilience there. Entire families of creatures create networks of tunnels that function like roads. Certain chambers might act like gathering halls, where whispers echo like wind chimes. Others might be marketplaces of sorts, though scaled down to fit the size of their people. Seeds dropped from above become priceless treasures. A single crumb from Finn's breakfast could feed a family for weeks. And then there are the rare objects that find their way underground, tiny buttons, beads, or fragments of glass that, to a worm, shine like jewels. These are the riches of the underworld, coveted and bartered like royal crowns. This paints a picture of an economy, small yet vibrant, driven by scavenging and careful resourcefulness. What's fascinating about Adventure Time is how it lets us glimpse just enough to imagine the rest. We don't see a grand underground capital city. Instead, we see Shelby's home and hear his stories. We see Kent's ambitions and the quiet bravery it takes just to leave the nest. But from that, we can build an image of an entire civilization where bravery is not measured by slaying monsters, but by daring to poke one's head out into the unknown. The deeper layers of this underground might also hold older mysteries. Remember, Ooh is a land shaped by the Mushroom War, its soil infused with the strange remnants of magic and technology that clashed long ago. It's possible that deep beneath the roots and tunnels, there are forgotten bunkers, sealed laboratories, or even veins of magical energy seeping into the earth. To the small folk underground, these might appear as dangerous anomalies, glowing stones that hum faintly, strange metal chambers that whisper when touched. Some could be feared as cursed, while others might be worshipped as sacred. What for Finn would be a piece of discarded technology might, for a worm community, be the center of their spiritual life. This is where the underground world ties into the grander lore of Adventure Time. The surface heroes like Finn and Jake often encounter ruins, dungeons, and relics of the past. But what about all the ruins that have sunken too deep for giants to notice? The underground folk may be their keepers even without realizing it. A worm family might burrow through a tunnel that passes dangerously close to an ancient magical battery, unknowingly living next to a source of power that could change the fate of Ooh. A child underground might play with a shard of glass, never knowing it once belonged to a great weapon shattered in the war. Their entire world could be haunted by the past in ways invisible to them but significant to us as observers. Shelby himself represents this strange balance between the ordinary and the profound. He's a worm, small and often comedic, but he carries himself with a surprising amount of calm wisdom. That might not just be his personality, it might be the result of living in a world where survival requires perspective. When the walls of your home can collapse at any moment, when predators can appear from the shadows, and when your fate often depends on forces larger than you could ever comprehend, wisdom becomes a natural survival tool. Shelby's voice, soft and deliberate, feels like the echo of a people who have always needed to think carefully before acting. So the tiny underground world is more than just tunnels. It's a mirror of Ooh itself, scaled down but no less important. There are adventures, dangers, treasures, and mysteries. The difference is that we only catch glimpses, just enough to realize how vast it could be. And maybe that's the point. Adventure Time thrives on hinting at worlds within worlds, on letting the imagination wander into the gaps. The underground society is one of these gaps, a whisper beneath the ground that makes us wonder how many other hidden civilizations might be thriving just out of sight. Now let's turn our gaze toward a story tucked so deep beneath Ooh that many surface dwellers never even know it exists. Think of all the grand adventures we've followed on rolling green fields in the shimmering skies and across enchanted kingdoms. But in the dark tunnels, between twisting roots and the silent crawl of the earth, there thrives a secret society that seems almost forgotten. The underground world is not vast in scale, but in spirit it is enormous. Now, we've already seen glimpses of Shelby's family and the humble yet persistent way they carve out homes underfoot. But zooming out just a little, we realize there's a whole network of interconnected life forms. Worms, beetles, spiders, and mysterious glow bugs are not simply living unnoticed lives. They create a subterranean culture that mirrors in its own quiet way the kingdoms above. They organize, share responsibilities, and maintain tunnels that serve as both homes and highways. If you think about it, these creatures keep Ooh stitched together in ways that go unseen. Without them, the soil would collapse, the roots would weaken, and the vibrant surface world might not stand so firm. There's a moment in Shelby's story where he talks about his many siblings, stretching into the hundreds. It's easy to laugh at the idea of such a massive family, but it also hints at how deep the worm lineage runs. Imagine hundreds of siblings, each tunneling through different corners of Oo, carrying stories of their own. Some might burrow into the foundations of the Candy Kingdom, becoming silent guardians of stability. Others might carve paths under ruined battlefields of the Mushroom War, weaving through remnants of ancient metal and twisted roots that reclaimed old cities. In their own way, they become the record keepers of Oo, preserving its layers of history beneath the ground. And then there's the question of leadership. On the surface, kingdoms are ruled by queens, princesses, or self-proclaimed lords. But underground, things operate differently. There isn't a single ruler, but rather a loose collective of creatures who balance one another. Glow bugs offer light. Worms like Shelby carve out the roads. Beetles maintain defenses, guarding against larger predators who sometimes intrude from deeper caves. It's a society built not on hierarchy, but on function. Everyone plays their part, and when one cannot, another quietly fills the gap. It's simple, but also profound. A reflection, perhaps, of how life itself survives best when cooperation outweighs ego. If we look closer, the underground world holds strange magic as well. Soil in Adventure Time is rarely just dirt. Sometimes it glows faintly, as if infused with ancient energy. Sometimes it whispers, carrying echoes of battles fought long ago. Worms and insects might not practice spells like wizards above, but they understand the pulse of the land. They know where ley lines cross, and where roots of magical trees store their power. In that sense, the underground dwellers become keepers of knowledge, storing wisdom not in books or scrolls, but in instinct, memory, and pathways known only to them. There's something calming about this world. It's not dramatic like the sky wars of cosmic entities or the chaos of magic gone wrong. Instead, it's soft, steady, rhythmic. Life beneath Oo moves like the heartbeat of the land itself. The worms dig, the beetles scuttle, the glow bugs shine, and together they create a quiet harmony that allows the surface to thrive. We may never see all of it on screen, but by piecing together hints, we understand just how much depends on these hidden workers. And yet, even in their hiddenness, stories find a way to emerge. Shelby's duel with his brother leaves us with a playful reminder that even in small societies, tension arises. Worms may live close, but they still struggle with rivalry, pride, and reconciliation. It makes them feel more human than we might first believe. Their tunnels are not just empty passageways, they're homes filled with arguments, laughter, mistakes, and bonds that tie them together. When we think about the grand design of O, it becomes impossible not to admire how even the smallest spaces tucked beneath the feet of heroes carry entire universes of meaning. The underground world isn't meant to dazzle us with grandeur. Instead, it reminds us of patience, resilience, and the idea that unseen effort sustains the greatest adventures. Every worm, every beetle, every glow bug plays their part quietly, never demanding credit, yet shaping the land where stories unfold. So the next time Finn and Jake set out on some daring adventure, picture the soil beneath them alive with a parallel story. Picture Shelby's countless siblings tunneling their paths, glowing insects illuminating secret chambers, and roots stretching across a web of hidden life. That is the underground world, humble, vital, and brimming with secrets we may never fully grasp. It is time to shift our gaze from the underground world of Shelby and his fellow creatures to someone who, on the surface, might seem far less mysterious. A strange, lanky bird-like merchant with a crooked neck, a squeaky voice, and a habit of speaking in rhyme. Yes, we are talking about Choose Goose, one of the strangest figures in all of Ooh. To many viewers, he is just comic relief, a silly little side character who sells magical wares while spouting nonsense. But if you look closer, if you listen carefully, you will start to realize there is something far more complex about him. Perhaps Choose Goose is not the fool he appears to be. Perhaps he is something more. At first glance, he seems laughable. His appearance is ungainly, with his long neck jutting out at odd angles, and his tongue sticking through crooked teeth as he rhymes words in ways that barely make sense. The characters in the show often dismiss him, too. Finn and Jake go to him for supplies, sometimes baffled, sometimes amused, and sometimes outright annoyed by his antics. He speaks in sing-song riddles, offering goods that often come with some kind of unexpected consequence. In many ways, he plays the role of a trickster merchant, the kind of figure you might expect to find in old fairy tales, selling odd items on a crooked little street corner. But here's the curious thing about Choose Goose, and his items work. They are not fraudulent. They are not simply for laughs. Many of his wares have serious magical properties. He sells books of spells, powerful potions, enchanted objects, and information that can alter the course of a story. Time and again, his role is small, but his impact lingers. It makes you wonder, where does he get these items from? And why does he sell them in such a strange and careless way? If you start peeling back the layers of his character, a pattern begins to emerge. For one, his rhyming speech. It is easy to dismiss it as a quirk, but rhyming has long been tied to ancient traditions of magic, incantations, and oral storytelling. In many mythologies, to speak in rhyme or verse is to channel something greater, as though the rhythm and wordplay themselves tap into an older, deeper force. Could it be that Choose Goose's strange speech is not just a personality trait, but a ritualistic way of speaking? Maybe in his own odd way, he is constantly reciting a protective charm, or weaving himself into the fabric of the magical world. Another layer to consider is his knowledge. Choose Goose knows things he should not. He provides characters with access to hidden lore and dangerous objects. He knows about spell books, curses, and arcane rituals, and yet he plays the fool, hiding his knowledge behind clumsy rhymes and silly mannerism. This makes him a deeply liminal figure, someone who stands between wisdom and foolishness, between comedy and tragedy. If you are not paying attention, you might overlook him completely. But if you are listening closely, you realize he may know more about Ooh's secrets than nearly anyone else. There is even an episode where his presence grows darker, where he is no longer just a silly shopkeeper, but instead aligns himself with less savory forces. He is capable of manipulation, capable of betrayal, and it makes you wonder, has he been underestimated all along? What if the goofy merchant is actually hiding his true power in plain sight? What if all of his odd quirks are part of a mask, one that lets him operate beneath suspicion? This is what makes Choose Goose so fascinating to talk about. He embodies a classic storytelling archetype, the trickster fool. In myths across the world, the fool is often the one who knows the most. They are underestimated, ignored, even laughed at, but when the moment comes, they reveal themselves to be the holder of great wisdom. In Ooh, Choose Goose fits this role perfectly. And it raises so many tantalizing questions. Did he stumble into power accidentally, or is he playing a very long game, moving unseen across the board of history? And then, of course, there is the mystery of his origins. Where did Choose Goose come from? Was he once a simple bird-like creature who gained knowledge of magic and trade through luck and persistence? Or was he touched by something far greater, something cosmic or arcane that altered the course of his life forever? His wares suggest connections to larger networks of magic, perhaps even the same forces that birthed wizards, witches, and elemental beings. Choose Goose might laugh and rhyme his way through life, but make no mistake, there is a thread of mystery running through him that begs to be unraveled. He is not just a side character meant to make you chuckle. He may in fact be a hidden keystone in the structure of Oo's magical history, a merchant who is far more dangerous, far more important, and far more knowing than anyone around him realizes. Choose Goose is introduced as a comic relief figure, with his silly rhymes, clumsy speech, and his quirky way of turning every sentence into a riddle-like song. But in the world of Adventure Time, the line between silly and profound is very thin. The Candy Kingdom itself is ruled by a scientist who dabbles in magic and philosophy. Finn, the supposed hero, is constantly learning that strength is not as important as kindness or curiosity. So when we meet a merchant like Choose Goose, who seems like a side character, it is worth slowing down and wondering, what is he really doing in the story? When Finn and Jake first encounter him, he is simply a shopkeeper, someone who trades strange items in exchange for treasure. At first glance, he is just a goofy NPC, like something out of a video game. But if you look closer, you start to notice little details about his shop and about his manner of speech that suggest he knows more than he lets on. His rhymes, while funny, often hide small truths. Sometimes he says things that foreshadow future events, almost as though he has access to knowledge that no ordinary shopkeeper should have. Was this just the writers playing around, or was it a deliberate hint that Choose Goose is more than he seems? There is a particular moment that fans often point to. In one of his appearances, Choose Goose offers Finn a magical item that turns out to be essential for the quest ahead. He does not simply hand it over. He presents it in a way that feels like destiny, as though he knows Finn is meant to use it. Characters in Adventure Time rarely act without purpose. Even the smallest choices seem to ripple across time. So if Choose Goose is giving Finn exactly what he needs at exactly the right moment, does that mean he is guided by some higher power, or is he secretly far wiser than we ever realized? His very design hints at mystery. Choose Goose is a tall, lanky creature with a long neck, a beak-like mouth, and a voice that almost feels like it was borrowed from another world. He's not a candy person, not a human, not an animal in the usual sense. He doesn't seem to belong to any particular kingdom or race in Ooh. Where did he come from? Why is he here? The show never tells us, and yet his presence lingers in our minds because of how unusual he is compared to everyone else. Some fans have speculated that Choose Goose might be a cursed being. The way he bends forward, the strange way he talks, and his awkward movements could all be signs that he is not in his natural state. Maybe he was once someone of power or influence who was transformed into this comical merchant figure, left to wander Ooh, selling odd trinkets and rhyming away the rest of his days. If that theory is true, then his humor and riddles could be his way of coping with the tragedy of his condition. In other words, his silliness would not be random, it would be a mask. This possibility becomes even more interesting when you remember how often Adventure Time hides deep lore inside background characters. Magic Man, for example, is introduced as a cruel trickster with no explanation. But eventually we discover he was once a godlike Martian who fell from grace. The same is true for Hunson Abadir, who at first seemed like just another monster, but turned out to be one of the most powerful entities in existence. If such enormous lore can hide inside seemingly minor characters, then it's not too far-fetched to think the same might be true of Choose Goose. One of the strangest things about Choose Goose is how he survives. The land of Oo is dangerous. There are monsters, bandits, curses, and wars constantly erupting. And yet this flimsy, goofy merchant never seems to be in real danger. He always has a shop running, always ready to trade, always popping up when Finn and Jake need him most. Is this just luck, or is there something protecting him? Maybe some hidden magical contract, or some unseen force that ensures he endures no matter what chaos surrounds him. And then there is his name, Choose Goose. Adventure Time does not pick names randomly. Choose suggests decision, fate, and the act of selecting a path. Goose adds the silliness, grounding him in comedy. But together, the name almost feels like a riddle itself. Perhaps he is a character who embodies choice, someone whose purpose is to appear when decisions matter most, offering tools that guide heroes down their destined paths. If that is true, then maybe Choose Goose is not just a shopkeeper at all. Maybe he is a subtle agent of destiny, nudging Finn and Jake forward, disguising his true role with bad rhymes and a floppy smile. Now, if you think about it, Choose Goose's speech pattern is one of the most memorable things about him. He talks in rhyme, often nonsensically, and that alone sets him apart from nearly every other character in the show. On the surface, it feels like a cheap gag, like a way to make him funny or odd. But rhyming has a long history in folklore. Rhyme is often tied to riddles, to prophecy, and to magical incantations. The way he speaks might not just be a quirk. It might actually be a channel through which he accesses something greater. The rhyme forces his words into a pattern, almost like a chant. And when spoken in rhythm, words can become more powerful. In stories, spells and riddles often demand rhyme. Choose Goose seems to have stumbled into this role naturally. It raises the question, is he even in control of what he says? Or is he something like an unwitting vessel? Sometimes his rhymes feel oddly prophetic, like they carry hints of truths he shouldn't know. Other times he appears scatterbrained and completely clueless. This duality makes him incredibly compelling. If he's just a fool, then he's one of the luckiest fools in Oo, because time and again he manages to survive and continue operating his little shop in a world where danger lurks around every corner. But if he's something more, then his clownish nature might actually be camouflage, a way to conceal whatever power or knowledge he carries until the time is right. One of the most telling moments with Choose Goose comes during the Fiona and Cake stories. Within those alternate tales, Choose Goose appears too, selling oddities and speaking in his strange, lilting rhymes. The fact that he exists even within those parallel narratives might suggest that he isn't just a random shopkeeper. His presence crosses into stories within stories, as if he's a figure tied not just to Oo, but to the structure of storytelling itself. A merchant of fate, offering choices, bargains, and wisdom wrapped in nonsense. His choosing may not simply be about what he sells, it may be about the paths people take after encountering him. Think about Finn and Jake's interactions with him. Often they don't just buy something practical. They get an item that nudges their adventures in unexpected directions. Choose Goose rarely hands over straightforward weapons or supplies. Instead, he sells things that are strange, impractical, or laced with hidden meaning. Sometimes these items end up being useless, but other times they become pivotal, like a gear turning quietly in the background of destiny. If Choose Goose is a fool, then perhaps fate itself is laughing through him. And if he is more than a fool, then maybe he knows exactly what he is doing, nudging heroes with cryptic gifts. His name itself is worth lingering on. Choose Goose. It sounds silly, yes, but what does it imply? Choice. The power to choose. A goose that guides choices or forces them. Geese in folklore often symbolize vigilance. They are watchful creatures, prone to honking alarms at the first sign of trouble. They are also migratory, moving between worlds and seasons. Perhaps his very name hints that he is a guide, a silly one, but still a guide through choices that matter. And in a world like Ooh, where free will and fate constantly collide, such a role might be far more important than it appears. Now we also have to consider the stranger, darker side of Choose Goose's story. As the series progresses, his role fades into the background. He doesn't have as many standout moments in later seasons, which on the surface might feel like he was abandoned as a joke character. But then we reach the episode Sons of Mars. This episode reveals a startling detail. Choose Goose apparently sold his soul. The moment is played for laughs, but it's a massive revelation if you pause and think about it. How did this goofy merchant even end up in a deal where his soul was on the table? With whom did he make such a bargain, and why? Selling one's soul isn't something we see many other characters do outright. It's an act that suggests knowledge of the underworld, deals with higher powers and desperation or cunning. For Choose Goose, this detail cracks open an entirely new dimension to his story. He is not just a background goofball, he is someone who has touched the machinery of death and debt. His rhyme, his shop, his strange persistence in a dangerous world, all suddenly take on a darker hue. He might be freewheeling and silly on the outside, but underneath, he is someone bound by a cosmic deal. And here's the thing. After this moment, he still continues to appear, still rhyming, still trading, still being his usual self. But knowing what we know, it makes you wonder, was he spared from punishment because he still has a role to play? Is his continued existence evidence that he is being kept around by the forces he bargained with? Or did his foolishness somehow allow him to slip out of what should have been his doom? It's the ambiguity that keeps Choose Goose fascinating. He walks the line between comedy and mystery, between background character and hidden lore keeper. Now, one of the most fascinating parts of Choose Goose's story is how it intersects with cosmic forces far beyond his little shop. We often see him as someone who deals in trinkets and rhymes, yet his presence threads into moments of destiny. Consider how he is the one who offers Finn and Jake advice, riddles, and magical items at key turning points. Sometimes his words make no sense, but sometimes they nudge our heroes onto paths they wouldn't have otherwise taken. This raises the possibility that Goose is not bumbling through life at all, but rather playing a role in guiding fate, using his strange humor as a mask. There's something archetypal about characters like him. In many myths, there is a fool, a trickster, or a clown figure who seems ridiculous but holds hidden wisdom. The Norse god Loki, the jester in medieval courts, or the wise fools of Shakespeare's plays, they all remind us that sometimes truth is hidden in laughter, and sometimes clarity comes from chaos. Choose Goose fits this pattern perfectly. His odd rhymes and silly demeanor might hide a deeper understanding of the world's mysteries, and perhaps even of Ooh's magical forces themselves. Think about his knowledge of enchantments. He is able to sell enchanted items, some of which are remarkably rare. This implies that he knows where to find them, or perhaps how to make them. Neither possibility matches up with the image of him as a harmless shopkeeper. And then there's his ability to offer riddles that line up with later events. This hints that he may have access to knowledge others cannot see, much like Prismo with his awareness of alternate realities. It is possible that Goose's role in the story is less about being a background character and more about acting as a messenger for unseen truths. One particular moment that stands out is his strange, almost hypnotic rhyming cadence. While it feels like a gag on the surface, there's something ritualistic about it too. Words have power in Adventure Time. Magic spells, curses, and even names themselves carry weight. By speaking constantly in rhyme, Choose Goose may be weaving a continuous spell through language, creating harmony in chaos. The characters around him never seem to fully notice this, but the audience does. And it leaves us wondering whether his speech pattern is a quirk or a deliberate magical practice disguised as foolishness. And then there is the question of his fate. Later in the series, we see hints that Goose may not be entirely safe or innocent. In Come Along With Me, he falls into the influence of evil forces, showing that even a whimsical figure can be corrupted. This shift is haunting, because it suggests that Goose's magical nature made him vulnerable to manipulation. If he was only ever a fool, this might not have happened. But if he was secretly powerful, then it makes sense that dark forces would try to claim him. His fall into corruption might be proof that he was never as simple as he seemed. But even with this darker turn, there's something strangely hopeful about his character. Goose reminds us that wisdom doesn't always wear a crown or speak in serious tones. Sometimes wisdom rhymes, sometimes it stumbles, sometimes it looks like nonsense until you think about it later in the quiet and realize it made more sense than anything else. Perhaps Goose's greatest role in Adventure Time is showing us that the small, silly voices in the background are worth listening to. They might be speaking truths no one else dares to say. So as we close this chapter on Choose Goose, we can see both sides of him, the bumbling merchant who makes us laugh, and the mysterious sage who might hold secrets about ooh that few others could know. Whether he is truly a fool or something more, his story lingers with us because it captures one of Adventure Time's most beautiful themes, that magic and meaning can be hidden in the most unexpected places. By now, we've seen Choose Goose stumble and sing his way through ooh with riddles, rhymes, and a peculiar brand of wisdom. But here's a thought I want you to settle into tonight. What if there was more to him than the silly exterior we so often see? What if his rhymes and his odd mannerisms weren't just quirks, but fragments of something much deeper, something tied to real magic, or even secrets hidden in the folds of ooh's history? That's what we're exploring in this segment, the mystery of Choose Goose's powers. Because let's be honest, for someone who seems like a wandering merchant, Choose Goose has access to knowledge, tools, and perhaps even spells that don't really make sense for his role. He isn't just peddling random junk. Sometimes what he carries is curiously specific, perfectly timed, or strangely powerful. It raises the question, is he truly just a fool with a funny way of speaking, or has he been hiding something more? Now let's start with the basics. Choose Goose runs his little stand in the grasslands, often popping up at just the right time to offer Finn and Jake something they need. Sometimes it's a weapon, sometimes it's a potion, and sometimes it's simply advice hidden within his rhymes. What's fascinating is that many of these items are not the kind of things you'd expect a random trader to have lying around. We've seen him with magical artifacts, enchanted scrolls, and even potions that affect destiny itself. That's a little suspicious, don't you think? He isn't exactly shopping at wholesale stores. His wares suggest that he either crafts them, discovers them in secret places, or receives them from sources far greater than himself. Take, for example, the times Finn and Jake actually rely on his goods. They often laugh him off at first, thinking he's just babbling nonsense, but when push comes to shove, his offerings sometimes prove invaluable. It's as though he knows in advance what they'll need, like a cosmic salesman who shows up at exactly the right moment. This timing feels almost supernatural. Is it coincidence? Or does Choose Goose have access to knowledge that allows him to see threads of fate weaving in real time? One of the most intriguing things about him is his speech. Every single line he delivers comes in rhyme. Now, you could say that's just a creative quirk of the writers, but within the world of Adventure Time, rhyme itself is powerful. Poetry, chants, and songs are often tied to spells and enchantments. Magic in Ooh sometimes responds to sound, to rhythm, to the deliberate shaping of words. So could Choose Goose's rhyming speech be more than just silly banter? Could it be a form of spellcasting, one he uses constantly, almost unconsciously? Think about how his rhymes always seem to land in a way that nudges the heroes forward. Even when they don't make much sense at first, they tend to align with the story's events. That's very similar to how oracles and prophets operate, speaking in riddles, giving truths disguised in playful or confusing language. And if Choose Goose does function as a sort of trickster oracle, then his rhyming could be his method of tapping into that deeper current of truth. But then we have to ask, if he truly has access to such power, why hide it? Why keep up the act of a goofy, bumbling merchant instead of stepping forward as a wise sage or a mighty wizard? This is where things get even more interesting, because maybe, just maybe, his foolishness is the disguise. Ooh is full of characters who pretend to be less than they are. Just think of Peppermint Butler, who hides his dark arts behind a cheerful peppermint smile. Perhaps Choose Goose has taken a similar approach, masking his power so that no one suspects his true nature. There's even a darker layer to consider. In later seasons, we discover that Choose Goose has a villainous side, manipulated by evil forces and even corrupted into something monstrous. Could this transformation hint that his powers were always unstable, always vulnerable to being twisted? It suggests that whatever knowledge or magic he had wasn't just simple trickery. It was something significant enough to attract the interest of villains and powerful beings who saw him as a tool. And what about his origin? Adventure Time never gives us a clear backstory for Choose Goose. We don't know where he came from, who taught him to rhyme, or how he gained access to magical wares. This lack of history feels deliberate, almost like a dangling thread we're meant to tug on. Because in a world where almost every quirky character has some deeper lore, it feels unlikely that Choose Goose is truly just a background gag. Some fans even theorize that Choose Goose could have once been an apprentice to a wizard, or that he belonged to a line of magical beings who communicate through rhyme. Others imagine he stumbled upon a cursed artifact, one that gifted him both power and madness. Whatever the case, his strange blend of wisdom, timing, and magical inventory makes it clear that he is not as simple as he appears. And so tonight, as we lie here thinking about this peculiar merchant, we find ourselves wondering, was every rhyme he spoke part of a larger spell? Was every trinket he sold placed in the story at just the right moment for reasons we cannot fully see? The more you think about it, the harder it is to laugh him off as nothing more than comic relief. Perhaps, under the feathers, rhymes, and foolish grin, Choose Goose was always a hidden architect, in the flow of Oo's adventures. Now, when we talk about Choose Goose's powers, the surface-level answer is pretty easy to spot. He's a merchant, a trickster, and a bit of a rhyming jester. His powers seem to come from clever wordplay and an ability to twist situations in his favor. But if we step back and really think about it, there are layers of mystery wrapped around him. Think about how often we see him with items that are deeply magical or rare. He always seems to have exactly the right thing at the right time, whether it's a potion, an enchanted trinket, or even the occasional piece of knowledge that feels almost too specific to be coincidence. It raises a question. How does he always know what to offer, and where does he get these things from? Unlike Peppermint Butler, who we know studies dark arts, or Wizard City merchants who openly practice spellcraft, Choose Goose's source of power is never really explained. He isn't seen studying, chanting, or pulling out grimoires. Instead, his magic feels casual, almost woven to who he is. Sometimes he sells things that could only be obtained through magical channels, as if he has unseen connections across Ooh and maybe even beyond. Could it be that he's far more knowledgeable than he lets on, using his silly rhymes as a mask to hide the depth of his understanding? This is a theme Adventure Time often plays with. The idea that the strangest characters, the ones who seem least important, are hiding the most unexpected truths. And with Choose Goose, that theme shines brightly. His odd mannerisms might make him look like a fool, but fools in folklore often carry wisdom hidden beneath their nonsense. The trickster, the jester, the clown, these figures hold secrets others overlook. When they speak, people laugh, but behind the laughter, a deeper meaning can sometimes be found. One thing that makes Choose Goose especially mysterious is the way he interacts with Finn and Jake. He doesn't just sell them items. He pushes them, nudges them, and sometimes confuses them into choices they might not have made otherwise. It almost feels as if he's guiding them on their journey, though never in a direct way. His rhymes can be silly, but if you listen closely, they sometimes have double meanings, carrying a message beneath the words. Maybe his power lies not only in what he sells, but in how he shapes the paths of those who cross his stall. There's also an uncanny quality to his survival. Adventure Time shows us a world full of dangers. Towns are destroyed, people disappear, kingdoms crumble. And yet Choose Goose endures. No matter what chaos unfolds around Ooh, whether it's the Lich's influence, cosmic threats, or wars between kingdoms, Choose Goose always seems to pop back up, alive and thriving, with his little cart of goods. This suggests some kind of protection, either magical or intentional. Does he have allies we never see? Or is there a deeper enchantment woven into his existence, ensuring that he always comes back, no matter what happens? We also can't ignore the fact that later in the series, his story takes darker turns. Without spoiling too much at this stage, it becomes clear that there is more to him than the silly goose act. That shift hints that his powers and his connections might have been hiding in plain sight all along. Could it be that every goofy rhyme, every strangely timed appearance, and every oddly perfect magical item was part of a much larger plan? It's a question that lingers quietly when you look back at his history. For now, let's hold on to the image of him as both a merchant and a mystery. His rhymes echo through the streets, his goods sparkle with hidden power, and his presence seems to defy the dangers of Ooh itself. Maybe his true power is less about spells and more about influence, less about incantations and more about timing. Either way, the deeper we look into his character, the more we realize that Choose Goose is not just comic relief. He is a puzzle piece in the grand picture of Ooh, one that doesn't quite fit anywhere neatly, and yet feels essential to the overall design. Choose Goose's odd way of speaking also feeds into this mystery. He tends to rhyme or twist his words in riddles, but sometimes his speech sounds like it comes from a deeper place. It is as though he's drawing from a pool of knowledge he can't entirely control, speaking truths he himself may not fully understand. There are moments where what he says feels almost prophetic, even if it's wrapped in nonsense. One could argue that this kind of speech is a side effect of channeling magic. After all, in Ooh, powerful spells and incantations often rely on rhythm, wordplay, and the bending of language. Perhaps his rhymes aren't just a quirky personality trait, but the outward sign of a mind constantly tethered to unseen magical currents. This raises a larger question. Was Choose Goose cursed? His peculiar body, his way of speaking, his strange insight that pops up at critical times, it could all be the result of someone experimenting on him or punishing him. Imagine a wizard with great knowledge who tried to challenge the established order of magic, only to be struck down and transformed into a weaker, silly-looking version of himself. In that form, he might still retain pieces of power and knowledge, but lack the capacity to use them freely. This could explain why he is both more and less than what he seems. Trapped in a form that inspires laughter, he continues to exist on the margins of society, always overlooked until his words prove too useful to ignore. And yet, if we turn our attention back to what we actually see in the series, we find that even the simplest scenes with Choose Goose carry a weight when revisited with this perspective. Take, for example, his role as a merchant. He doesn't just sell items, he often provides exactly what the heroes need, right when they need it. Some might call that a coincidence. But in Adventure Time, coincidences rarely happen without deeper meaning. Could he somehow sense what Finn and Jake would require, nudging them along in their journey by putting just the right object in their path? In this light, his merchant's stall becomes more than a shop. It becomes a hidden node of destiny, a place where threads of fate are quietly woven into the larger tapestry. There's another element to consider: his shifting role between being a helper and a betrayer. At times, Choose Goose aids Finn and Jake, offering tools or guidance that advance their quest. At other times, he betrays their trust, serving villains or trying to manipulate events to his own advantage. This duplicity could be read as simple greed or foolishness, but it could also be seen as evidence that his powers are unstable or that he himself is caught between larger forces. Maybe he doesn't fully control who he helps or harms. Maybe he's pulled along by energies he only partly understands, acting more like an instrument of fate than an independent actor. His betrayals could then be seen as not entirely his fault, but as the consequence of being bound to a force greater than himself. Even his appearance supports this reading. Choose Goose doesn't look like any natural creature of Ooh. His body is stretched, awkward, bird-like, yet not fully avian. His wings seem too small to fly, his neck too long, his face cartoonishly narrow. He looks as if he belongs to no natural category. This sense of being out of place might be another clue that he is the product of magic gone wrong, or right, depending on one's perspective. Perhaps his very form is a disguise or a limitation, binding him to a life of half-fool, half-prophet, where no one would take his word seriously, even if he spoke cosmic truth. One might even wonder if this appearance is a protective mask. If Choose Goose truly holds power or knowledge beyond what he lets on, then hiding behind the image of a fool would be the perfect cover. He could move unnoticed, free from the attention of those who might seek to control or destroy him. After all, powerful beings in Ooh are constantly locked in conflict wizards, battling for dominance, cosmic entities shaping reality, gods and demons wrestling over the fate of mortals. To exist in that world with true power is to carry great danger. But to exist as a fool, invisible to ambition, and overlooked by tyrants, that might be the safest place of all. Choose Goose, then, may be a master of self-preservation, disguising himself as weak in order to remain free. And yet, the cracks in this disguise keep showing. We cannot ignore the way he seems to know more than he should, the way he is in the right place at the right time, the way he speaks words that resonate with magic, even if cloaked in rhyme. He is a contradiction, simultaneously harmless and dangerous, silly and wise, weak and powerful. And contradictions in Adventure Time almost always mean something bigger is at play. If we think back to the way Choose Goose often appeared during moments of choice or transformation, it is possible that he acted almost like a test for others. Finn and Jake, who frequently bought from him, never received what they wanted in the clean and easy way they expected. Instead, Goose's goods or advice often forced them to take a detour, to reflect, or to solve their problem in a new direction. Was this intentional wisdom hidden beneath his nonsense, or simply the randomness of a strange merchant? That is left unanswered. Still, his survival through different ages tells us much about his nature. Many characters in Ooh are bound to their roles. Peppermint Butler forever tied to the Candy Kingdom, Death bound to the Underworld, and Prismo confined to his time room. But Goose floated through all these boundaries. He was at home in the market, in forests, in the courts of great kings, and even on the battlefield of destiny. Few beings manage such adaptability without a core strength guiding them. His foolish words may have been camouflage for something far more cunning. When Goose finally reaches his darkest turn, transforming into Choose Bruce, the sinister edge is shocking precisely because it feels like the truth beneath the mask has finally broken through. His laughter turns to growls, his riddles to threats. Yet even here he never becomes entirely clear. His motivations remain strange and opaque, as though his descent into shadow was not just corruption, but perhaps another kind of test. Did he want to see if others could resist him, or if Finn and Jake could rise above temptation? His actions hint at a being who knows more than he lets on, perhaps even more than he can say outright. The mystery of his powers becomes sharper when we consider how Ooh itself responds to him. In a world where magic often reveals itself through grand gestures, fireballs, shape-shifting, necromancy, Goose rarely demonstrates such abilities. Instead, his power comes through presence, through the way he shapes events without needing to dominate them directly. He provides a spark, and others ignite into flame. That kind of influence is more subtle, but often more lasting. It is almost as though he existed in a liminal space, half merchant, half prophet, never fully committing to either side of his identity. The items he sold could be junk or treasure, depending on how they were used, and the same could be said of his words. The line between wisdom and foolishness was always blurred in his case, and perhaps that was the point. In Ooh, where absurdity and truth often intertwine, Choose Goose embodies the idea that you cannot always separate the two. Sometimes the fool is the teacher, and sometimes the joke is the lesson. If we step back and see him not just as a quirky side character, but as a symbol, Goose becomes much more significant. He may represent the unpredictable hand of fate in the land of Ooh, a reminder that not every choice is clear, not every helper is trustworthy, and not every lesson comes dressed as wisdom. His strange mixture of comedy, menace, and mystery leaves us with more questions than answers, but that in itself is part of his power. In the end, the truth of Choose Goose may lie not in whether he was secretly all-powerful, but in the way he forced others to confront themselves. Through him, characters faced greed, temptation, foolishness, and trust. Through him, we as viewers were reminded that the strangest figures can hide the deepest truths. And even though his story ends in shadow, his legacy is one of curiosity and wonder. He was never what he seemed, and perhaps that is why he endures in our memories long after his final appearance. With Choose Goose, the mystery is not meant to be solved but to be pondered. That is his lasting gift to Ooh and to us. Among the strangest and most haunting figures in Adventure Time's vast mythology is Death, the quiet and shadowy ruler of the Underworld. Unlike many of Ooh's colorful and quirky beings, Death is not loud or flamboyant. He does not cackle with villainy or laugh with mischief. Instead, he carries with him a stillness, the kind of eerie calm that comes only with absolute certainty. For Death is not a trickster, nor a conqueror, nor a king of a fleeting realm. He is the inevitable force that waits at the end of every road, patient and unshakable. When we first encounter Death, we see him sitting atop a skeletal horse in a gloomy corner of the Underworld. His design is simple, yet deeply unsettling. A long, pale face stretched like bone over a thin body, his eye sockets glowing faintly, his bony frame draped in dark robes. His horse, equally skeletal, clatters across the barren landscape with a sound like dry bone striking stone. It is an image that feels ancient, as though it has existed long before Ooh, long before the Mushroom War, and long before the birth of magic itself. Death's appearance in Adventure Time may seem sudden and strange, but it fits seamlessly into the show's tapestry of cosmic forces. Where Gulb represents chaos and Prismo represents time and choice, Death represents the unchanging certainty of endings. The underworld he rules over is just as fascinating. It is not a blazing inferno, nor a realm of torture, but instead a strange, shadow-filled place that reflects Ooh's whimsical yet unsettling tone. Here skeletons wander like lost travelers. Rivers flow with strange, glowing colors. Echoes of forgotten lives drift endlessly through the darkness. It is not a place of punishment, but rather a place of permanence, a land where things go when their stories are finished. And standing watch over it all is Death, who ensures that nothing escapes his domain without proper balance being maintained. One of the most memorable stories involving Death comes in the episode where Finn and Jake travel into the Underworld. They are not there to wander or explore. Instead, they are on a mission. Jake, after being swallowed by a creature known as the Lich, has his soul sent down into the Underworld. Finn, desperate to save his brother, follows him into this eerie realm. The adventure that follows gives us one of the clearest glimpses into who Death truly is, and what role he plays in the larger story of Ooh. When Finn and Jake confront Death, we do not see a being who is cruel or sadistic. Instead, we see someone who treats his duty with a calm professionalism. He listens to their plea, but he does not bend easily. To him, a soul is a soul. Once taken, it is his responsibility to keep it. He is not swayed by emotion, nor by friendship, nor by promises. To Death, all souls are equal in the end. What makes their encounter interesting is not Death's lack of empathy, but rather the way he views existence itself. In his eyes, the living cling to life desperately, Yet all paths must eventually lead to him. It is not a matter of cruelty, but a simple truth of balance. And yet, death is not without flaws. Though powerful and inevitable, he is not omnipotent. He can be bargained with and, in rare cases, tricked. This is something that Jake and Finn attempt when they strike a deal with him. To them, death is not just the end, but also an obstacle to be outwitted. For the viewer, this paints death not as a supreme godlike being, but rather as a keeper of rules. He is bound by a system just as much as he enforces it. This makes him all the more fascinating. He is not an untouchable force like Gulb, but rather an ancient warden of the natural order, tied to the laws of the universe in ways even he may not fully control. What is most striking about Death's presence in Adventure Time is how quietly unsettling he is. His words are sparse, his manner calm, and his world bleak but not chaotic. His stillness makes him more intimidating than if he were loud or fiery. Death does not need to shout to remind you of his power. His very existence is enough to unnerve even the bravest of heroes. In this way, he serves as a reminder of something beyond adventure, beyond quests, beyond crowns and kingdoms. He is the silent certainty that no matter how many battles are won, or how many empires rise and fall, there will always be an end, waiting, patient, and unmoving. For viewers, this makes Death's role in the show surprisingly profound. Adventure Time often deals with whimsical ideas of magic, candy kingdoms, and strange dreamlike worlds. But when Death appears, the tone shifts. It becomes heavier, more contemplative. Suddenly, the silly adventures of Finn and Jake are confronted with a truth far greater than themselves. And though the show never lingers too long on grim realities, it allows Death's presence to echo in the background, a reminder that even in a land of endless imagination, some forces remain absolute. If we think about Death in comparison to other rulers of realms in Adventure Time, we can begin to see how unique he is. Take Hunson Abadir, ruler of the Nightosphere. Hunson delights in chaos and torment, thriving on consuming souls and spreading his dark influence. Or think about Orgolorg, who hungers for power on a cosmic scale. Both of these beings seem animated by desires and hungers, emotions that fuel their actions. Death, by contrast, seems emptied of desire. He does not hunger for anything, nor does he lust for conquest or control. His role is functional, almost bureaucratic, but infused with the heavy weight of inevitability. This makes him chilling because he represents something all the other cosmic figures avoid. They fight, scheme, and manipulate, but eventually all must pass through the stillness of death. Now, if we step back and look at how Finn interacts with Death, we get one of the most telling glimpses of his character. In the episode Death in Bloom, Finn and Jake must bargain with Death after their carelessness leads to the death of Princess Bubblegum's beloved plant. For most heroes in fantasy tales, entering the Underworld would be an epic quest full of trials, dangers, and riddles. For Finn, though, it feels both strange and strangely casual. He is a boy walking into the domain of something eternal, yet he treats it with the courage and sincerity that define him. Finn doesn't flinch, doesn't fall to his knees, and doesn't cower. Instead, he speaks to Death the way he speaks to anyone else, as if saying, "I know you are the end of everything, but right now I just need to solve this problem." That's part of what makes Finn a unique hero. His ability to treat even the greatest forces of existence with openness rather than fear gives the scene a sense of quiet humor and deep meaning. Death himself responds not with wrath or punishment, but with negotiation. He treats Finn and Jake like petitioners in an ancient hall, weighing their requests and offering them a chance to prove their worth. This shows us that death, while grim, is not unfair. He has his laws, his rules, and if someone meets them, they may receive mercy. When Finn and Jake ultimately outwit death by tricking him in a music contest, it doesn't come across as cruel or disrespectful. Death himself seems almost resigned, as if this too is part of the natural order. The lesson here is fascinating. Death is not beyond being challenged, but those who do must understand the gravity of what they are risking. Another striking aspect of death's presence is the underworld itself. The space does not resemble the fiery pits of hell or the endless paradise of heaven. Instead, it feels like a vast in-between, where souls wander, waiting. The underworld is depicted as a place of darkness, but not one dripping with torment. Instead, it feels stagnant, still, and heavy with silence. It is the kind of place that can make someone uncomfortable, not because of suffering, but because of its stillness. The lack of motion, the absence of time, gives it a weight that is almost more terrifying than flames or chains. This vision of the underworld reflects the way Adventure Time so often reframes mythological tropes. Instead of a fiery pit or a golden paradise, it shows us a place that feels like eternity itself, stripped of distractions. In that silence, we see the truth that eternity can be unsettling, even frightening. It's worth noting how other characters react to death's existence. Peppermint Butler, the Candy Kingdom's master of dark magic, is deeply respectful of death. His reverence suggests that even among practitioners of necromancy and arcane arts, death is regarded as an absolute boundary. You can summon spirits, conjure demons, and draw power from strange sources, but ultimately, all roads lead to death. This boundary ensures that, even in a world filled with magic and chaos, there is still one ultimate constant that cannot be erased. The respect Peppermint Butler shows reflects the larger lore of Ooh. Even the strangest, wildest magical forces bow before the final keeper of ending. The design of Death himself also tells us something about his role. He is skeletal but not monstrous. He doesn't loom with fire in his eyes or claws dripping with blood. Instead, his simplicity conveys the idea that death does not need to impress. He does not need to terrify with displays of power because his very presence is enough. He is what waits at the end of all journeys. His calm, almost emotionless tone emphasizes that he is not driven by hatred or malice. He simply is. This makes him a more haunting figure than one who thrives on scaring mortals. He is a mirror, reminding characters and viewers alike of the unavoidable truth. Now, as grim and terrifying as death may seem, his underworld does not carry the chaos of fire and brimstone that many other mythologies might suggest. Adventure Time paints it in a quieter, eerier way, where the most unsettling thing is not burning torment, but the stillness of finality. His world is stark, silent, and lifeless, and that emptiness itself is the punishment. For a series so full of vibrant characters and over-the-top adventures, this depiction is chilling in its restraint. It reminds us that true death is not about violence or horror, but about silence, about the end of song, laughter, and movement. In this way, Adventure Time stays true to its poetic approach to even the darkest themes. But let's take a closer look at Death himself. His skeletal frame, his deep hollow voice, and his casual arrogance make him feel like a ruler who knows his position can never be challenged. He doesn't have to fight to maintain his power. He doesn't have to boast or flaunt his strength. He simply exists, and that existence alone makes him terrifying. In many ways, he is unlike the Ice King or even the Lich, who actively seek to shape the world around them. Death, instead, represents inevitability. He does not chase anyone down because he knows that eventually everyone comes to him. This makes him one of the most patient and powerful beings in Ooh. He waits because he always wins. Interestingly, Death is not portrayed as wholly evil. In fact, there's something neutral about him. He is harsh and cruel at times, but he does not pursue destruction in the way the Lich does. Instead, he simply enforces the laws of his domain, in the same way that Peppermint Butler bends the rules of magic, or Princess Bubblegum bends the rules of science. Death is the embodiment of order within the underworld. There is a system in place, and he ensures it is never broken. When Finn and Jake visit him, he does not lash out at them right away. He talks, he bargains, and he evaluates them before deciding their fate. This shows us that he isn't an unthinking force. He is sentient, calculating, and capable of reasoning, even if his judgment feels unfair. Another fascinating moment that shows Death's neutrality is how he interacts with life. Yes, in Adventure Time, there is a character simply called Life, a counterpart to Death. Life is depicted as a radiant, magical creature who births the things of the world while Death waits to claim them at the end. This duality is simple but profound. The two are opposites, yet they need each other to complete the cycle. If life only gave and death never took, the world would be overwhelmed. If death only took and life never gave, the world would fade into nothing. Together, they maintain a balance, though their methods could not be more different. This balance between the two makes the universe of Ooh feel more mythological, as if it runs on principles as old as time itself. When Jake faces death in the underworld, the encounter highlights just how much of a trickster Jake really is. Death, in his supreme confidence, underestimates Jake's ability to think on his feet. Instead of relying on brute force, Jake cleverly outsmarts Death by challenging him to a musical showdown. This moment, while humorous on the surface, actually reveals something vital about Death's character. For all his power and authority, he is not invincible. He can be distracted, entertained, and even bested if the rules of his own domain allow it. The underworld might be his kingdom, but like any ruler, he can be caught off guard. Jake's victory here reminds us that even the most powerful beings can have vulnerabilities. However, this encounter also raises questions about the very nature of Death's authority. If he can be beaten, does that mean the laws of the underworld are not absolute? Or is the lesson more symbolic, showing us that even in the face of inevitability, wit and courage still hold value? This is the brilliance of Adventure Time's writing. It doesn't just introduce a spooky skeleton character to scare the audience. It gives us something deeper to think about, an allegory about how we confront the fears that no one can truly escape. There is also an unsettling implication about Death's realm. Unlike other magical beings, Death does not seem to fear Golb, the chaotic force that embodies ultimate destruction. In fact, one might imagine that the two are deeply connected. If Golb represents the unmaking of existence, then Death is what waits on the other side. Death is not about chaos or corruption, but about finality. He doesn't revel in evil or torment. He is simply the clean ending to all stories. Golb is noise and entropy, while Death is silence, and so, in a strange way, they could be seen as two ends of the same road. What makes Death especially fascinating in the world of Ooh is how the living treat him. He is rarely spoken of directly, almost as if the people of the land want to avoid drawing his attention. Yet characters like Peppermint Butler, acknowledge his existence with the same respect they give to powerful magical entities. This shows that in Ooh, death is not just a natural event, but a cosmic force with a personality, rules, and influence. It isn't random or hidden. It is embodied in a figure who can be bargained with, defied, or feared. When we think about the Underworld in Adventure Time, it isn't just about spooky aesthetics or scary moments. It's about what it represents. The constant presence of mortality in a land that otherwise feels so whimsical and magical. For every Candy Kingdom festival and every strange magical quest, there is always the reminder that somewhere beneath it all lies silence, waiting patiently. Death's role as keeper of that silence makes him one of the most important figures in the grand tapestry of Adventure Time's mythology. Death is one of those figures in Adventure Time who carries both great weight and great mystery. Unlike many other cosmic beings, Death does not loudly announce himself. He does not throw his power around to prove that he is the master of his domain. Instead, he simply exists, performing his role with quiet authority, as though he has been doing so for an eternity. His calmness is unnerving because, unlike other villains or gods, there is no sense of conflict or hesitation in him. He is not playing a game, nor is he trying to control others. He represents something absolute, something unshakable, something final. This calmness might be what makes him so eerie. When Finn and Jake speak to him, Death does not rush, nor does he raise his voice. He listens, he answers, he waits. He embodies inevitability itself, and that is why his presence feels so heavy. In a world like Ooh, where nearly anything is possible, where candy comes alive, where magic flows freely, and where creatures can reshape reality, the reminder that there are still rules which cannot be broken is sobering. Death is one of those rules. Yet what makes Adventure Time's Death unique compared to traditional depictions is how strangely ordinary he appears. His skeletal figure, his slightly nasal voice, his casual mannerisms, all make him feel less like a terrifying reaper and more like an office worker at the end of time. It gives the sense that death itself is not meant to be feared, but accepted, that it is part of the cycle of existence. This is not the image of death as a cruel destroyer. Instead, it is death as a custodian, as a caretaker of a necessary process that ensures life has meaning. But even in this ordinariness, there is danger. Death may be calm, but he does not bend his rules easily. When Finn and Jake try to trick him, it nearly backfires. They learn that even cleverness and bravery have limits when confronting a force like death. Death may laugh, he may negotiate, but he does not give away his power recklessly. He knows that every bargain, every exception, creates ripples. His role is to preserve balance, and that balance cannot be tipped without consequences. We can see this in how Peppermint Butler interacts with him. Peppermint Butler, who has dabbled in the darkest corners of magic, treats Death with reverence. He does not attempt to command him, nor does he dismiss him. Instead, he shows caution, respect, and perhaps even a little fear. This reaction tells us much about the hierarchy of power in Ooh. Even for a master of forbidden arts, Death is not someone to casually cross. What is perhaps most fascinating is that Death in Adventure Time does not come across as evil. He is neutral, almost detached. He carries out his duties not with malice, but with necessity. This neutrality makes him different from beings like the Lich, whose essence is destruction, or Hunson Abadir, whose hunger for souls is selfish. Death does not consume, nor does he corrupt. He simply collects what is owed when the time comes. And yet beneath that neutrality, there lies a subtle sadness. His isolation, His lonely realm, his detached manner, it all hints at the weight of carrying such a role. To oversee the end of every life, to be forever tied to the boundary of existence, must carry a burden that no one else could truly understand. In this way, death is both powerful and tragic. He is essential to the world, yet removed from it, watching the cycles of life and never participating in them. Finn and Jake's interactions with him reveal an important truth. Death in Ooh is not something to fight endlessly, nor something to dread. It is a reality that even heroes must face, and learning to live with that awareness makes their victories and their friendships all the more meaningful. Death, in a way, gives their lives weight. Without him, there would be no urgency, no stakes, no reason to cherish the fleeting moments of joy. As the keeper of the Underworld, death stands as a reminder that every story has an end, and that endings themselves are not always bad. They are natural, they are needed, and they allow new beginnings to take place. In Adventure Time's vast and strange mythology, death is one of the most quietly profound figures. He may not roar like cosmic beings or scheme like dark lords, but his presence lingers in every tale. He is the shadow beneath the laughter, the silence after the music, the stillness that reminds us all that life is precious, precisely because it does not last forever. And as Finn, Jake, and even characters like Peppermint Butler discover, understanding death is not about conquering him. It is about learning to accept him, to respect him, and to find peace in the knowledge that even in the land of Ooh, not everything is endless. Some things must end, and that too is part of the adventure. When we think of the Underworld in Adventure Time, our minds often picture one simple idea, a place beneath the surface of Ooh where the dead must go. But the truth is, the Underworld is not just one cavern or a single realm. It is an entire structure, a layered existence that feels less like a graveyard and more like a grand kingdom, meticulously organized under the rule of Death himself. At first glance, the Underworld can seem like a gloomy, endless cave system. Jagged rocks, rivers of fog, and dim torches paint the atmosphere. But as Finn and Jake discover during their journey, this realm is not a chaotic wasteland. It has order, strange rules, and a hierarchy that mirrors the living world in eerie ways. In fact, the way it is structured suggests that the Underworld is one of the most carefully managed domains in all of Adventure Time's cosmology. The first layer we encounter is the most familiar, the place where spirits gather upon leaving their bodies. It is not full of torture or fiery pits, but rather a long, winding plain where souls seem to linger. This liminal space feels like a waiting room, an entrance hall for eternity, where the dead must come to terms with what has happened to them. This layer reminds us that death in Adventure Time is not treated with endless punishment or cruelty. Instead, it is simply another stage of existence. As Finn and Jake press further during their adventure in the Underworld, we begin to see the structure unfold. There are deeper chambers, corridors, and grand halls that feel almost royal in design. Death's throne room stands at the heart of it all, a vast cavern with a sense of both finality and dignity. This chamber shows that Death is not just a shadowy figure lurking in the dark. He is a ruler, presiding over an enormous system, guiding souls with authority and control. The architecture of this space makes it clear that Death is as much a kingdom as the Candy Kingdom or the Fire Kingdom. But what makes the Underworld especially fascinating is that it doesn't seem to hold every soul in Ooh. Some characters, like the ghosts we meet in various episodes, wander freely in the land of the living. Others, such as Hunson Abadir's victims, appear bound to entirely different planes of torment or shadow. This suggests that the underworld is one branch of a greater web, a carefully maintained segment of the afterlife. It might not be the only destination for souls, but it is one of the most important, holding order where other realms only bring chaos. The underworld also seems to obey laws that even the most powerful beings cannot ignore. When Finn and Jake travel there to retrieve Jake's soul, they cannot simply storm in without consequence. They must navigate trials, accept limitations, and ultimately come face to face with death himself to bargain for release. This is not an open playground, but a heavily guarded structure, with rules written into the very fabric of existence. In many ways, these rules keep the balance between life and death intact. Without them, souls could wander endlessly and chaos would spill into the living world. Even the way Death himself interacts with the underworld shows its structured nature. He is not just a warden, but a keeper, almost like a bureaucrat of eternity. His responsibility is to ensure that every soul is where it belongs, whether it remains in his kingdom or moves beyond it to places we do not fully understand. The underworld is therefore less of a prison and more of a checkpoint, a system designed to preserve balance. And yet, there is mystery in every corner of this realm. The deeper we imagine traveling into its winding paths, and the more questions arise. How many levels exist below what Finn and Jake saw? Are there regions reserved for different kinds of souls, perhaps heroes, villains, or a magical being? Could the underworld be infinite, with layers that spiral downward into secrets even Death himself might not share? This layered, structured vision of the underworld sets it apart from simple portrayals of death in other stories. It gives us a sense that even in the land of the dead, there is organization, meaning, and purpose. Every torchlit corridor, every echoing hall, and every silent plane has a place in the grand design of Oo's afterlife. If we trace the structure of the underworld further, we begin to notice that it isn't simply a dark place filled with gloom. Adventure Time presents it as strangely ordered, almost like a kingdom with clear rules, roles, and divisions of power. For many viewers, it can be surprising to realize that death in this universe does not descend into chaos. Instead, it follows a structure that is both functional and oddly familiar. We first see hints of this structure through the way Death himself operates. He does not chase after every single soul. He does not hover ominously over the land of Ooh, waiting to collect the fallen. Instead, he sits at the heart of the underworld, calmly waiting. When a being dies, their spirit naturally drifts down to his domain. This suggests an automatic system, almost like gravity, that pulls the soul away from the land of the living. Death's role is not to hunt or to stalk, but to preside. He is more like a ruler or a judge who only acts when a wandering soul arrives at his throne. This alone gives the underworld a fascinating quality. It is not a place where souls are punished endlessly, nor is it purely a paradise. It feels more like a processing hall for existence, where beings come to face their final truth. Death sits as both gatekeeper and arbiter, and the underworld is designed as the place where that judgment unfolds. The way it is presented visually adds to this sense of structure. The underworld in Adventure Time is drawn with strange rock formations, vast caverns, and glowing rivers of light that seem to flow endlessly. Unlike the Candy Kingdom, where everything is bright and silly, or the Nightosphere, where chaos and torment rule, the underworld has a stillness that feels almost sacred. It is not loud or terrifying. Instead, it feels ancient, orderly, and inevitable. Another fascinating detail about the Underworld structure comes through the presence of guardians. When Finn and Jake enter this realm, they do not simply walk into Death's chamber unchallenged. There are creatures and obstacles in their way, almost like checkpoints. Some of these obstacles feel symbolic, as if to remind the living that the Underworld is not a place to enter lightly. Each layer must be passed, each boundary respected, until the heart of the realm is reached. In this sense, the Underworld mirrors other mythologies. Think of Greek stories, where souls must cross the river Styx before they can reach Hades' domain, or where guardians like Cerberus guard the gates. Adventure Time puts its own whimsical spin on this idea, but the essence remains the same. The Underworld is layered. It is not simply a single room with death at its center. It has depth, and each part of it seems to serve a purpose. The role of music in the Underworld also adds another clue about its inner workings. When Finn plays the music that entertains Death, it isn't just a funny moment. It shows that Death values ritual, art, and perhaps even distraction. His domain is quiet and still, but within that silence there is space for performance and creativity. This detail is subtle, but important because it shows that the Underworld is not a place of pure emptiness. It is a realm that acknowledges the value of human expression, even in the face of the final end. And then there is the question of where the Underworld ends. Adventure Time never gives us a map, but from what we see, it feels vast. Its caverns could stretch endlessly, and its rivers could flow without beginning or end. There may be parts we never glimpse, regions meant for different kinds of souls, or areas reserved for beings who wield cosmic power. The show leaves this ambiguous, but that ambiguity allows us to imagine a layered structure far greater than what Finn and Jake encounter. One theory that fans often suggest is that the Underworld in Adventure Time has multiple floors or levels, each one suited to a different kind of spirit. On one level might exist the ordinary souls of creatures who lived and died without great consequence. On another level could rest the remnants of beings connected to magic, whose essence is not easily destroyed. And perhaps at the deepest level are those whose existence threaten the balance of the world, souls that must be kept far away from the land of the living. Whether or not the show confirms this, the idea fits naturally with what we know. Death himself appears powerful enough to manage such a system, and the Underworld has the weight and scale of a place far more complex than just a cavern and a throne. As we descend deeper into this vision of the Underworld, something becomes clear. This is not just a gloomy place made to punish or to torment. It feels more like a natural order, a balance that Oo quietly maintains behind the curtain of daily adventures. Think about it for a moment. Every living being in Oo, from the smallest candy citizen to the grandest cosmic entity, has a path that leads here once their story ends. The Underworld, then, becomes a mirror of Oo itself, shaped by choices, actions, and the memories a soul carries into eternity. In one way, the Underworld feels almost bureaucratic. The fairy system, the structure of guardians, the way souls are judged and sorted, all of it seems like a process that has existed for eons. This raises an intriguing thought. If this system predates Oo as we know it, does it mean that the Underworld was forged during or right after the Great Mushroom War? Or has it existed far longer, perhaps built by forces even older than Death himself? Its sheer organization suggests that it was not cobbled together by accident. Someone or something designed this grand system of transition. The architecture of the Underworld itself gives us clues. When we see glimpses of it in the series, we notice how it echoes both ancient mythologies and the surreal landscapes of Uu. Some areas look like old temples or ruins, places built to hold not just bodies, but meaning. Other parts of the underworld are much stranger, filled with floating rocks, endless rivers, and doors that appear to lead nowhere. The variety suggests that it may have grown over time, shaped by different rulers or cosmic events, almost like a city that has been rebuilt countless times after earthquakes. Each layer adds new complexities to the realm. What makes the underworld even more compelling is its flexibility. Not every soul who dies ends up in the same state. We see this clearly with Finn and Jake's journey, where the brothers experience the realm not as static, but as something responsive. For Finn, it feels like a surreal dreamscape, echoing his fears and desires. For Jake, who has a more spiritual and flexible nature, the underworld seems less intimidating, even at times whimsical. This adaptability hints at a structure that bends to the soul's perception, almost as if the underworld molds itself to reflect the inner truth of whoever enters it. One cannot ignore the role of the ferryman in this structure. His presence is more than symbolic. In mythology, ferrymen are often neutral guides, figures who enforce the rules but do not judge. This neutrality makes them crucial to the balance of the underworld. If death is the keeper of order, then the ferryman is the one who ensures every soul crosses the boundary correctly. Without him, chaos could seep in, with souls wandering where they should not be. Imagine what that would mean for Uu, where already magic, science, and chaos intermingle. A breakdown in the underworld could spill into the land of the living, upsetting the balance entirely. The different layers of the underworld add another layer of intrigue. While Adventure Time does not give us a detailed map, there are hints that the underworld is not a single space, but a vast series of interconnected realms. Some are quiet and peaceful, almost like resting grounds. Others are darker, echoing with the cries of souls who perhaps resisted their fate or carried heavy burdens with them. This layered structure suggests a hierarchy, not just of places, but of experiences. A soul's journey might depend on their life's path, guiding them to one layer over another. What is fascinating here is how the underworld, despite its intimidating role, does not feel entirely unjust. Unlike depictions of hell in some traditions, this place is not purely about punishment. Instead, it feels like a sorting system. Souls are directed where they need to be, not where they are arbitrarily cast. That distinction makes the underworld of Uu unique. It suggests that the land values balance over cruelty, order over fear. It is not about eternal suffering, but about finding the correct place for every soul, whether that place is calm or challenging. This order is also reinforced by how Finn interacts with the underworld. His journey reveals that even the living can access it, but not without risk. By entering, Finn is not just trespassing, but bending the natural law. That he succeeds shows his heroism, but it also highlights the underworld's flexibility. The system is strong enough to guide billions of souls, but it is not completely closed off. There are loopholes, cracks in the wall, and these cracks allow stories like Finn and Jake's to unfold. They remind us that in Uu, even the strongest structures can bend when touched by love, bravery, or destiny. We should also pause to consider the aesthetics of this realm. The way it is drawn and presented in the show feels deliberate. There is a dreamlike quality to its skies, a vastness that cannot be contained by walls. Unlike the Candy Kingdom or the Fire Kingdom, which feel grounded in specific cultures, the underworld feels otherworldly, almost cosmic. Its colors are muted yet haunting. Its structures familiar yet strange. This ambiguity mirrors the mystery of death itself, something humanity has always tried to understand but never fully explained. The creators of Adventure Time lean into this mystery, making the Underworld both captivating and unsettling. As we continue examining the structure, one more element becomes essential to note: the role of memory. Souls in the Underworld often seem to retain fragments of who they were, as if they are carrying their stories with them. This retention of memory adds depth to the structure. It means that the Underworld is not simply an ending, but also a continuation, a place where identity lingers even after the body is gone. This feature transforms the Underworld from a silent grave into a living archive, one where every soul's story is preserved in some form. As we drift deeper into the mysteries of the Underworld, one final reflection remains to be considered. The structure of this realm, with its layered corridors, its hidden trials, and its presence as both a mirror and a separation from the living world, carries a profound meaning. It tells us that the land of the dead is not a place of final endings, but rather a place of passage, a reminder that all things continue in some form, even if the shape they take is different from what came before. The Underworld of Ooh is not a chaotic void, nor is it a place of simple punishment. Instead, it is carefully structured, almost like a grand archive, holding the echoes of every life that has ever been lived. Each soul finds its place, whether in Death's Hall and the many twisting realms beneath it, or scattered among the strange landscapes where forgotten spirits wander. The very idea that there is order, that there is a place for every soul, is both comforting and deeply mysterious. This order also suggests something important about the world of Adventure Time itself. It tells us that even beyond chaos, beyond the strange and unpredictable nature of Ooh, there exists a hidden rhythm. For every whimsical creature, for every kingdom that rises or falls, there is still an underlying current, a set of rules that even magic and madness cannot break. The Underworld is one of those rules, an anchor to remind us that life and death are not simply random, but part of a cycle as old as existence itself. Think of Finn and Jake's many journeys into the Underworld. In each, they do not encounter complete destruction or endless despair. Instead, they find a path, a test, a way forward. Death himself may be firm, but he is not cruel. He has a role to play, and he fulfills it with patience. The structure of the Underworld reflects this same patience. It is not hurried. It is not frantic. It waits for every soul to arrive in its own time. Perhaps the most striking aspect of this structure is how it reflects the balance of Ooh. Above ground, we see kingdoms, wars, friendships, and laughter. Below ground, we see the quiet certainty of endings, kept safe and orderly so that the living can continue their chaotic dance without fear that the fabric of existence will unravel. One cannot exist without the other. The surface is movement. The underworld is stillness. Together, they create harmony. And so the underworld is not just a place for the dead. It is a foundation for the living. Without it, life would lose its meaning, for beginnings would never have true weight without endings. This truth hums softly through every layer of the realm, reminding us that closure is not something to fear, but something to honor. As we bring this segment and this journey to a close, it is worth pausing to appreciate how Adventure Time, in its gentle yet profound way, invites us to think about life and death not as harsh opposites, but as two sides of the same song. The structure of the Underworld is that song's echo, carrying on after the notes have been played, still resonating in the silence. So now, as you rest, let your mind drift on the calm certainty that there is structure, there is balance, and there is continuity. The Underworld, like the dream you are slipping into, is a place of passage, a reminder that every ending is part of a larger design. Good night, traveler of stories. May your dreams be calm, your rest be deep, and may you awaken with the quiet assurance that all things, in their own way, find their place.